ජලයේ නැවුම් රසයෙන් උණු කර නිවාගත් ජලයට වඩා සුරක්ෂිත වතුර දෙන Unilever Pureit.
Towards stability. 4 ministers appointed to a new cabinet as a first step towards a non-partisan interim government. Won't be a part. Opposition leader declines requests by both Prime Minister and President to join new government. Majority support. SLPP pledges support for a government under Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe. Worse before it gets better. Sri Lanka won't face a hunger crisis. Prime Minister pledges food, fuel and medicine.
We are getting back on our feet. We need your assistance for a year.
All this and much more coming up tonight, this Saturday, the 14th of May 2022.
සුවඳ ජැස්මින් සහ විටමින් E සාරය සමගින් Novalax White.
From AdaDerana, this is AdaDerana First at 9. Live from Studio 24 in Colombo.
Welcome to your English news on AdaDerana 24. I'm Indivari Amwatha. Sri Lanka's president today swore in 4 new cabinet ministers in an effort to ensure stability until a full cabinet is formed. Political sources reveal that a full cabinet will be appointed before Parliament convenes on the 17th of May.
Sri Lanka has not had a stable cabinet of ministers functioning for more than a month since anti-government protests broke out following the agitation in the vicinity of President's house in Mirihana on the 31st of March. On the 4th of April, the Sri Lanka Pudujana Perumuna-led government's cabinet of ministers resigned following a temporary cabinet which was appointed with just 4 ministers. Later, on the 18th of April, a new cabinet was appointed with a total of 21 ministers. However, earlier this week, following much public uproar, the former Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa stepped down from his position. On Thursday, the 12th of May, President Gotabaya Rajapaksa appointed the United National Party's only Member of Parliament, Ranil Wickremesinghe, as the new Prime Minister of the country. After discussions with political parties, the President today appointed 4 ministers to the new cabinet. The President's media division stated that the 4 ministers were appointed in order to maintain the affairs of the Parliament and other functions of the country legitimately and to maintain stability until a full cabinet is appointed. 3 out of the new 4 cabinet ministers were appointed to their former cabinet portfolios. As such, Professor G.L. Peiris was sworn in as the Minister of Foreign Affairs. Dinesh Gunawardena was appointed as the Minister of Public Administration, Home Affairs, Provincial Councils and Local Government. Kanchana Wijesekara was appointed as the Minister of Power and Energy. Former Minister of Public Security and Tourism, Prasanna Ranatunga, was sworn in as the Minister of Urban Development and Housing.
Sri Lanka's new Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe pledges to somehow ensure sufficient food, fuel and medicine are available, saying there won't be a hunger crisis in the country. In an interview with the BBC World News, the new Prime Minister said he's in talks with friendly nations to support Sri Lanka and urged assistance of these nations for a year. Prime Minister Wickremesinghe also took the opportunity to tell Sri Lankans to remain patient as it will get worse before it gets better.
What's the first thing you're going to do in your new job?
First is to find out how bad the economy is. No one has got all the details. So I will be like a doctor who's opening up the patient for the first time. But I know there are issues. We've got to deal with the IMF. We've got to find money to get through this year. And I'm also speaking to friendly nations to come and assist us with bridging finance. But we've also got to create an atmosphere for foreign investment.
You yourself said a month ago that resources are running out.
Yes.
How much worse could it get?
It is going to get worse before it gets better. So I am looking for all the details that I could tell the people of Sri Lanka, this is the position and this is what we are planning to do in the coming months. I somehow ensure there's sufficient food, fuel and medicine available.
And how will you do that?
We'll have to look for help from outside and talk to them.
If you don't get the help from India, Japan or other countries that you haven't mentioned, then you're saying that there could be a hunger crisis by the summer.
There won't be a hunger crisis. Somehow we'll find food.
Somehow, but how if you don't get enough funds?
After I speak to them, there will be help coming from there. They won't allow people to starve.
The protesters at Go Village, the other thing they keep saying is that they still want President Gotabaya Rajapaksa to quit. Why did you agree to serve alongside him?
Prime Minister is elected by Parliament, and members of Parliament on both sides wanted me to be Prime Minister to tackle the economic situation.
So how are you going to change the course then? Because there are a number of policies that people agree were a failure of the Rajapaksa government.
I am going to change many other policies of the Rajapaksa government.
You say that you're going to look at the books, figure things out and...
I am not going to look at the books. I want to see how bad the situation is, how the real economy is functioning, what is left there in the central bank. I am not looking at the books. I know the books are cooked. I can't look at it at the moment. But what the economy is, I will. One is the monetary side of it. We are dealing with the IMF on the monetary side, but the real economy is not functioning.
What's the timeline for you to turn things round? What would you say to the people of Sri Lanka?
I will tell them, be patient, but gradually I will bring it back.
Is there any other message you have for the world? You've just taken on a very challenging job. What would your message be to people watching this around the world as well?
We are getting back on our feet. We need your assistance for a year. Whatever we get from you, we'll repay, certainly, and help us to do it. We are the longest and the oldest democracy in Asia.
Leader of the opposition Sajith Premadasa declined an invitation extended by the new Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe to join the proposed new government. In reply to a letter by Prime Minister Wickremesinghe, leader of the main opposition party, the Samagi Jana Balawegaya, Sajith Premadasa said that his party will not join a new government but will support correct decisions with regard to the economic crisis.
Opposition leader Sajith Premadasa stated yesterday that he will not nominate any members from the Samagi Jana Balawegaya to the cabinet that the president intends to form. The SJB leader's comments came in response to a letter sent by the president, responding to the opposition leader's first letter expressing his willingness to take up premiership, subject to some conditions. In his letter of response, the president, while stating that his decision to appoint Ranil Wickremesinghe as Prime Minister cannot be reversed as it was taken following discussions with political leaders, requested the opposition leader to inform immediately if he desires to include any of his party members to the new cabinet. Responding to this, opposition leader Sajith Premadasa, while declining cabinet portfolios to his party, went on to say that it is incorrect to say that he had first announced his intention to accept premiership on the 12th of May. Meanwhile, Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe, in a letter to opposition leader Sajith Premadasa today, extended an invitation to his party to join the proposed new cabinet. In his letter directed to the Samagi Jana Balawegaya leader, the new Prime Minister explained that he took on premiership with the support of all parties representing Parliament for the formation of a non-partisan government and to take the country on a new path. PM Wickremesinghe added that the only option left to save the country from the current situation is to embark on this new political path and to work with everyone's best ability. Noting that every day that passes by, the future of the country is put to greater risk, the Premier requested the opposition leader to consider it a national responsibility to support the joint effort to bring political, economic and social stability to Sri Lanka. However, in reply to the Prime Minister's letter, opposition leader Sajith Premadasa wrote that solutions to the economic and political crisis should be sought in accordance with the views of the people. In his letter of reply, Premadasa said that it was very clear that among various demands, the people are demanding a regime without Rajapaksas. However, Sajith Premadasa informed that his party will extend its support as a responsible opposition to correct decisions taken in finding solutions to economic problems of the people.
And the Sri Lanka Podujana Peramuna has decided to support a government established under Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe. The ruling party pledged their support during a meeting of its parliamentary group held under the patronage of President Gotabaya Rajapaksa this morning. Meanwhile, the Sri Lanka Freedom Party also announced yesterday that they had decided to not be a partner in the government of which Ranil Wickremesinghe is Prime Minister. Chairman of the party, former President Maithripala Sirisena, said the party will not accept any ministerial portfolios or other posts. Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe met with several diplomats yesterday as well as today to discuss the current situation in the country. Today, the Premier met with the Korean ambassador to Sri Lanka, Woong Jin-jeong. Wickremesinghe also met with Deputy High Commissioner to the United Kingdom of Sri Lanka, Lisa Wonstall. The meeting with the French ambassador to Sri Lanka, Eric Levoto, also took place today at the Temple Trees. Later during the day, Italian ambassador to Sri Lanka, Rita Manelia, called on the Premier as well. In the meantime, the meeting with the Norwegian ambassador to Sri Lanka, Trine Eskadel, was also held. The Prime Minister also met with the ambassador of the European Union in Sri Lanka, Denny Chaibi. Meeting with the German ambassador to Sri Lanka, Holger Sobert, was also held. And the US ambassador to Sri Lanka, Julie Chung, and leader of the Janata Vimukti Peramuna, MP Anurakumara Sanayaka, was held today. They discussed the most urgent challenges faced by the island nation. In a tweet, the US envoy noted that she continues to meet with a wide range of political representatives to encourage the Sri Lankan government's efforts to move towards a sustainable, inclusive solution to the economic crisis. Reportedly, the US envoy and the JVP leader were joined by MP Vijitha Herath. Opposition leader Sajith Premadasa meanwhile met Gota Go Home protesters at the opposition leader's office. Representatives of the protest site presented a set of proposals and demands when they met the opposition leader today. The protest at the Golface Green has been continuously carried out despite the curfew. Undeterred by the curfew, many demands remained at the Golface Green protest site last night as well.
With the curfew lifted at 6 AM today, many people joined the struggle at the Golface Green today to mark its 36th continuous day. The protesters' calls for President Gotabaya Rajapaksa to step down continue unchanged. In the meantime, opposition leader Sajith Premadasa today met with representatives of All Party Struggle, an organisation affiliated to the Golface struggle. During the meeting, they handed over a proposal to the leader of the opposition. The representatives had stated that this is an opportune moment for all political parties to work together. During the meeting, opposition leader Sajith Premadasa said he will stay true to his policies and will not join the new cabinet. He added that they will also support the good policies and recommendations that have been proposed by the protesters at the Golface Green.
Protests still continue over the lack of gas and fuel. Details after this break.
Big 3.
India announced earlier this week that they will provide Sri Lanka with 65,000 metric tons of urea fertilizer required for the current yalla cultivation season in the country. Accordingly, the Indian government will provide the consignment of urea under the existing $1 billion credit line. Sri Lankan High Commissioner in New Delhi, Milinda Moragada, meanwhile discussed with the Secretary to the Indian Department of Fertilizers ways to ensure a continuous supply of chemical fertilizer to Sri Lanka beyond the Indian credit line.
The High Commissioner of Sri Lanka in New Delhi, Milinda Moragoda, met with the Secretary of the Department of Fertilizers in India, Sri Rajesh Kumar Chaturvedi, early this week to discuss the supply of urea fertilizer required for the current yalla cultivation season in Sri Lanka. The meeting followed the Indian government's decision to immediately supply 65,000 metric tons of urea to Sri Lanka, which is the total requirement for paddy cultivation in the current yalla season. The government of India had decided to supply this quantity of urea immediately under the existing $1 billion credit line, despite a ban on export urea from India. Sri Lankan High Commissioner Milinda Moragoda had also discussed with the Indian Fertilizers Department Secretary ways and means to ensure continuous supply of chemical fertilizer from India to Sri Lanka under the existing credit line and beyond. Sri Rajesh Kumar Chaturvedi assured the department's support to Sri Lanka in keeping with India's neighbourhood first policy and assured that the 65,000 metric tons of fertilizer will be shipped to Sri Lanka from the nearest Indian port under his purview.
The Consumer Affairs Authority said the law will be strictly enforced against traders who sell rice above the stipulated maximum retail prices. According to the CAA, a sole proprietorship will be fined 100,000 rupees up to a maximum of 500,000 rupees for engaging in such misconduct. Meanwhile, a private company that sells rice higher than the maximum retail prices will be fined 500,000 rupees up to a maximum of 5 million rupees. The CAA also noted that lawsuits would be filed before the court against such traders. On the 2nd of May, the Consumer Affairs Authority gazetted maximum retail prices for 3 local varieties of rice. However, the new maximum retail prices were not applied to rice stocks released to market at concessionary prices by the Paddy Marketing Board. Frustrations of the people ran wild today after the Slave Island police failed to make due on a promise that the people could collect LP gas cylinders today. As the tensions rose, the Sri Lanka Army personnel were then deployed to the area in order to control the angry crowd.
For months now, Sri Lankans island-wide have faced severe inconveniences due to the lack of availability of fuel and gas in the country. Today was no different, as people awaited in long lines formed outside refilling stations in order to get both LP gas and fuel. Many people frustrated by the lack of domestic gas cylinders took to protests at various parts of Colombo today. The high-level road was blocked from the area of Navina in Maharagama today by many who had awaited long hours outside the refilling station in the vicinity, unable to meet the demands. The army and police made their way to the area to disperse the protesters after close to 2 hours of protest, causing severe inconvenience to the people travelling along the road, leading to traffic congestions. Meanwhile, tensions arose in front of the Slave Island police station today after police were unable to live up to the promises of providing the people with domestic gas cylinders. Later, army personnel were deployed to control the crowds that had gathered in front of the police station. The protesters had, however, dispersed only after police had issued tokens to the protesters.
Contrary to media reports, the Sri Lanka Tourism Development Authority clarifies that the Uchamune Island in Kalpitiya has not been sold to foreign investors. Instead, the island has been leased to a foreign investor for a period of 30 years.
Media reports emerged that the land of the Uchamunai Island in Kalpitiya has been sold to foreign investors without following due procedure. In response, the Sri Lanka Tourism Development Authority issued a notice clarifying that the Uchamunai Island has not been sold. But the island in question has been leased for a period of 30 years to a foreign investor. SLTDA said that the land was leased in an attempt to drive much-needed foreign direct investments. In its notice, the SLTDA said that as per the Tourism Act No. 38 of 2005, the SLTDA is mandated to lease out SLTDA-owned lands to potential investors to develop and operate tourism hotels and resorts in a planned and sustainable manner. SLTDS says it followed due procedure when leasing the Uchamunai Island in Kalpitiya and obtained all necessary approvals to lease out the property to a foreign investor for 30 years as per land alienation policy. The approval process was completed in late 2020 for a $417.5 million project.
Now, global shares rose yesterday as Wall Street rallied to end a volatile week of trading. Global markets and US stocks were down sharply most of this week as investors grew anxious about the possibility of a recession. The S&P 500 index is off nearly 20% from its all-time high in January and was close to a bear market on Thursday. But investors' fears over whether US Federal Reserve's chair, Jerome Powell, can accomplish a soft landing, bringing inflation down while keeping the US economy growing, appeared to ease at least temporarily on Friday. Despite Friday's gains, the S&P 500 and the Nasdaq posted their 6th consecutive weekly loss, and the Dow notched its 7th consecutive weekly dip. Emerging market stocks rose 1.83%. MSCI's broadest index of Asia-Pacific shares outside Japan rallied 201% from Thursday's 22-month closing low. Japan's Nikkei rose 2.64%. Cryptocurrencies steadied on Friday, with Bitcoin recovering from a 16-month low after a volatile week dominated by the collapse in value of Terra USD, a so-called stable coin. And global oil prices rose about 4% on Friday as US gasoline prices jumped to a record high. Brent futures rose $4.10 or 3.8% to settle at $111.55 a barrel. US West Texas Intermediate crude rose $4.36 or 4.1% to settle at $110.49, the highest close for WTI since March 25th and its third straight weekly rise.
Oil prices have been volatile, supported by worries of a possible EU ban on Russian oil could tighten supplies, pressured by fears that a resurgent COVID-19 pandemic could cut global demand. Reuters quoted analysts saying that an EU embargo, if fully enacted, could take about 3 million barrels per day of Russian oil offline, which will completely disrupt and ultimately shift global trade flows, triggering market panic and extreme price volatility. This week, Moscow slapped sanctions on several European energy companies, causing worries about supplies. In China, authorities pledged to support the economy, and city officials said Shanghai would start to ease coronavirus traffic restrictions and open shops this month. The EU has said there was enough progress to relaunch nuclear negotiations with Iran, but the US said it appreciated the EU's efforts, although there was no agreement yet and no certainty that one might be reached. Analysts say that an agreement with Iran could add another 1 million barrels per day of oil supplied to the market. Group of 7 foreign ministers meanwhile vowed to reinforce Russia's economic and political isolation, continuing supply weapons to Ukraine and tackle what Germany's foreign minister described as a wheat war being waged by Moscow.
Also in news tonight, former wartime defense spokesperson Lakshman Hulugalla passed away earlier today. He was serving as the Consul General of Sri Lanka to Sydney in Australia. Reportedly, Lakshman Hulugalla was being treated at a hospital in Sydney for an ailment. Sources say that his body is due to be repatriated to the island in the coming days. Hulugalla had previously served as the Director General of the Media Centre for National Security, General of the NGO Secretariat, and Deputy Chairman of the National Livestock Development Board. With that, we wrap up tonight's edition of First at 9, your AdaDerana English news service. Have a pleasant evening. Good night.